Welcome to the Mick Dark Horror Series. Lights out. Good. Here we go.
I was lost in a sense of confusion and dread for nearly a month since the devouring of my hometown. I had written my story just in case I were to die, so that it may possibly warn somebody about the fucked up incidents that occurred just 20 miles north of this town. But nobody seemed to care what I said. No person in this oblivious little corner of the world would believe a word I said. It's as if no news of our entire town's destruction had reached the eyes and ears of a single soul behind our nature wall, Wakefield. That is the name of the town I ended up in, and I had seemed like some crazed lunatic to the rest of the townsfolk ever since my unexpected arrival. First few days or so, people just figured I was suffering from exhaustion and was delusional. After about a week, people believed me to be absolutely bonkers. I told them about what happened, that if they didn't believe me, to head up to the town and check it out for themselves. Nobody really went, except for a couple police officers who pretended to care. They came back sometime later that day and, well, they told me the entire town was still there along with the people in it. They really had me going there for a while. I thought that maybe I'd been going crazy, until I was knocked back into my senses with a cold, hard slap from reality in the form of a radio transmission. I had snagged a radio from the police when they were distracted one day by some locals fighting and managed to sneak it back to the place I'm staying in. It's a nice little guest shed that the fisherman who saved my life let me stay in. He was the only one in town that didn't seem oblivious and was very nice to me. Of course, I didn't tell him everything, but I trust him. Seems like a good person. Anyway, I made it back to my shed with the radio and occasionally tuned in to some various stations. I didn't care for the music, but it did comfort me at times. I kept it low and hidden so that even my host would not know that I had the radio. I knew that if the police were looking for it, that it would get rattled out for sure, so I kept it to myself. I tried to listen to the calls they would give each day for petty crimes or things to check out. None of it was exciting or had anything to do with what I wanted to hear. It was either a petty brawl, thief, or drunkard, or somebody got spooked by a raccoon or something. I was listening to random channels one day, flipping through them at times to listen to whatever was happening. That's when I heard him.
Hello? Hello? If you can hear me, please, help.
The static voice said, cutting in and out, and then fading altogether. Kenneth. No. That's not possible. He was grabbed by the beast. He couldn't possibly have survived. He's dead. He should be dead. But he's not. He's not. I quickly answer back after I realize whose voice I'm hearing, and there's no reply afterward. Poor Kenneth. He's all alone back in Silver Crossing. Probably been tortured by that thing. He must have escaped and found a really good hiding spot. I doubt he's got much food and water left. He might be hurt as well. Damn it! I'm such a coward. I shouldn't have left him behind. Screw this. Screw this. If nobody will listen to me or help me, then I'll have to go by myself. I'd rather die trying to save him than sit here waiting for my inevitable demise. I thought as I started to pack my stuff, head out of the shed, mentally preparing myself for this suicide mission. I might have seemed courageous at the time, but deep down, I was shaken to my core. To have faced this monster again was the hardest decision I've ever had to make. I was trying to comfort myself by rationalizing that the beast had fled to some other poor town. That's why we weren't attacked in Wakefield for the past month. Even the fog had disappeared and the forest seemed normal. No missing persons, no screaming voices, and wildlife everywhere. Maybe it was gone. Or maybe it was waiting like the hunter it was, for easy meals to make their way right into its gaping maw. Either way, I had to stop going back and forth in my head and head for death. I turned the radio off, hid it in the pack the fisherman had given me for belongings. He asked me where I was heading, but I just made up some excuse to get him off my back. He also took a small black journal I found, a pen, some jerky the fisherman had given me, and a pistol he must have carelessly forgotten about in an unlocked cabinet, along with some ammo for it. I told him I'd be back, so as to keep me from getting suspicious along with keeping him and the police off my trail. I reluctantly made it to the mouth of the forest on the edge of town, dived headfirst into the thick woods. I'd made it about 30 yards in when I heard a noise that seemed out of place. There weren't many animals around, but I knew from hunting over the years what animals sounded like. It's the kind of thing people just can't teach you. It's a natural instinct that you sort of gain from being out in the wilderness long enough. That's why I knew the sound I was hearing wasn't coming from an animal. It was following me. I would have thought that maybe the beast was back. But there was no fog, and the steps were too light. I coolly and calmly kept my pace and pretended not to notice. I inched my hand ever so gently towards the pistol I had tucked in my jeans. When I had my hand on the handle, that's when whatever had been stalking me decided to jump out. Wrong move, pal. I quickly drew the pistol and I turned around. I hesitated on firing because when I saw no threat, at least it didn't appear to me as such.
"Please, don't shoot. I'm here to help you,"
said a tall man in a long white coat, with clothes on that looked like he ought to have been in some fancy building rather than skulking around in the woods.
"Help me? If you're here to help me, why you been stalking me?"
I said, still pointing the gun at the man.
"I had to make sure you were the right person, and that you were in the right state of mind."
Right person? What are you talking about?
"Who are you?"
I said a little louder this time, hoping to intimidate the man into spilling any information about himself.
"I came looking for you when I heard the news of your survival at Silver Crossing. I've been listening in on the townsfolk at Wakefield, and I heard your story."
The man said, lowering his hands and talking more calmly now.
"So you know what happened. You know what this thing is. Why haven't you told anybody yet? Surely people will believe a scientist."
I had so many more questions, but the man cut me off.
"Don't worry. I'm going to answer all your questions in time, but we need to go. There isn't much time,"
he said as he motioned me to follow him.
"Not until you tell me who you are. I'm not following some stranger into the forest, especially after the shit I've seen. Who are you?" My name is Mick Reed. As I said before, I am a scientist, and I have all the answers you need on the monster that destroyed your town. I can't follow you. I have to go save my friend. He is still up there. I have to at least try to save him,"
I said as I tried to walk the opposite way from the man.
I know the friend you're speaking of. I heard him on my radio too. If you come with me, we might be able to save him, but you must come quick,"
the man said, now with a shred of fear glinting off his brown eyes behind the square glasses he wore. Hesitantly, I followed the man. He led me to a large hatch in the forest floor, covered by thick brush, that looked almost artificial in placement. As he opened it, I was astonished. The inside looked futuristic and so out of date with our town or any settlement that may have been nearby. He led me down into an underground laboratory of some kind. It was filled with all kinds of technology that seemed odd to me at the time. Now, looking back, I realized that it wasn't out of place at all. We were out of place. As we walked through the pearly white halls that were illuminated by ominous faint red lights and flickering ceiling lights, I noticed the damage. There was shattered glass and bullet holes littering the floors and walls, dried blood splattering across the corridors. It gave me an unnerving chill up my spine as I cautiously followed the strange man further into the abandoned bunker. We reached a large room that had multiple fancy-looking televisions. He later told me were computer screens, and giant steel contraptions with light and buttons covering the exterior, and sat me in a chair to explain all that I was seeing. He took a deep sigh and divulged to me things that at the time blew my small-town mind and disgusted me beyond belief.
Now, before you come to any kind of rash conclusion about my morality and how much I deserve to die, hear me out. I want to say beforehand that I tried to stop it. I tried to keep those crazy bastards from creating the terror that ensued upon your town. Instead, I failed miserably, and I was locked up for the remainder of the experiment. The town you know as Silver Crossing doesn't exist. It's a military experiment. Silver Crossing, Wakefield, and another town you may have heard of named Black Rock are all confined in a large fenced-in area. Each of the town's comings and goings, along with many of the authoritative figures in your town, were actually controlled by the military. All the imports and exports were handled by this facility and managed so that people of the towns never had any reason to leave the comforts they were used to. All the technology in your town, such as theaters, TVs, and landline phones, were all controlled and regulated by this facility. The world outside this experimental area is exponentially more advanced than you may have been used to, as you may have seen by what is in this room alone. Even the scientists working here were controlled to some extent. I, for example, had been blindfolded and brought here for what they would only say was top secret. We had been briefed about the social experiment in your towns. I'm still not sure what the point was exactly, but we believe they wanted to see how behavior of humans was without the progression of technology.
He went on and on while I listened in a frozen state of confused horror. My entire life had been fake? Simulation? There's no way this guy was telling the truth, but the more he explained, the more that made sense. I sat and listened on as his story unfolded, all the while low whirring and beeping coming from the machines around me. Took everything in me not to want to shoot them. I think was a genuine fear or remorse in his expression that made me hold back. He continued on.
One day, the experiment changed. Some of the scientists working on a number of bioexperiments regarding the surrounding wildlife, they made a terrible mistake. Our lab was working on multiple experiments that would further military efforts, and one of the series of tests they were running was creating a super animal. They wanted to breed some type of war beast from splicing the DNA of multiple animals. They weren't just limited to the animals local to this area, however. They had loads of exotic DNA from animals around the world. It was fascinating to me, if I'm being honest. But even some things did make me sick. They terminated each failure, proceeded to play God. Eventually, it went too far. I'm not sure what list of animals they used for what they called their success, but it must have met their standards. It grew exponentially, could follow commands very well with the chip they put in its brain to control it. Its hide was bulletproof, was made to be aggressive, an aggressive slaughtering machine. The thing that made it special, aside from its freakish appearance, was that it could mimic and produce most sounds, mainly human voices or cries of other animals. They wanted this monster to produce fear in their enemies. They eventually noticed that the thing became more aggressive the further it grew. It became progressively harder to control, even with the tech they put in the brain. One day, it ate a scientist, splattering remains along the walls. Afterward, it called out to us using his voice. I was so distraught, filled with dread, that I knew something had to be done. I waited till the guards were distracted, and I tried to gas the thing. I turned on the noxious fumes and opened the vents inside its enclosure. It started shrieking.
in the dead scientist's voice, in its own gurgled growl. It was working. I was killing it. But before I could finish the job, I was caught and thrown into a cell. They turned the gas off, and it survived. Eventually, a couple of other scientists had spoken up. They had too been locked in the cell with me. About 5 days had gone by when we stirred from our sleep to the sounds of alarms and flashing lights. Our cell door had suddenly opened. We heard screams from further down into the facility. Apparently, the thing had escaped somehow, killed multiple people, along with damaging some of the electronics before finding its way out. Luckily, I was able to escape because I had managed to mess up the locking system on some of the doors. But after its escape, the remaining high officers were given the order to tie up loose ends. They started shooting the rest of the scientists and other workers. I found some poor dead soul all mangled on the floor in one of the rooms down in the hall. I decided to cover myself in his blood and play dead. It worked. Somehow. And I was left down here in the facility. I restarted the monitors here, watched as they all evacuated the area. I heard through our communications network they had planned on abandoning the area for experimentation while letting their newfound creation roam free. It's my understanding that they wanted to see how it would behave and kill in a more natural environment before terminating it. It was going to tie up their loose ends for them. And the loose ends they needed tying up were the towns. Silver Crossing, which is the closest town from here, suffered the consequences of our actions first. The beast had destroyed much of our machines here, including pretty much anything that would let me get a clear message out to anybody. The only thing it hadn't fully destroyed were some of the monitors here connected to the various cameras around the area. I'm not particularly brave. I knew that if I didn't have a plan, that I would surely receive the same fate as my fellow peers, so I sat and I studied its behavior in an attempt to form a plan on killing the damn thing.
As he ended this last sentence, the anger I had turned into rage.
Sat and studied? You mean to tell me that you sat and watched as our entire town was slaughtered? Your only excuse for not warning us is that you were too chicken shit to do anything. You watched as our town turned into a fucking buffet.
I said as I yelled at him. Shooting him would feel so damn good. But I knew that despite how I felt, that I would need his help.
Do you know how to kill this thing, or not?
I said, lowering my voice slightly, but still upset.
Yes. That's the point I was getting to. As I said before, toxic gas seems to weaken and injure the beast. I think the soldiers left some gas bombs in the facilities that we could use. We must hurry to your friend. However, I fear the beast may appear at any time. We must be ready.
Even though I hated this man, I couldn't agree more that we had to hurry, and this nightmare needed to end. I ditched my small pack for a larger military-grade one, grabbed a better gun. I know he said that it was bulletproof, but I had no clue what I would encounter, so I took it for comfort. We exited the facility and headed for Silver Crossing. The sun was dancing over us, getting lower as it fell towards the mountains. We arrived at the edge of town just after the sun had disappeared. The fog that had become accustomed to when our town was feeding ground for the beast was gone. The pale twilight in the sky illuminated the town, showing the empty carcass of what remained. It was so quiet that I could hear my own heart beating out of my chest. I turned my radio on again and called for Kenneth.
Kenneth, buddy, are you there? Please respond if you can hear me. We're here to rescue you,
I said in a desperate attempt to contact him. Suddenly, almost immediately, a voice replied from the other end.
Steven, is that you? I'm here. I'm whole up at my place.
Kenneth said, as the static overtook his voice. I tried to call him again, but nothing happened. The radios were screwed. That's when we noticed it behind us, creeping up like a hungry spider, and enveloping the trees, quickly engulfing them in a thick, ominous smoke, came the fog. My heart dropped to my stomach again as I knew what this meant. We both knew instantly that we had to run. As we headed further into town, I tried to guess where Kenneth said he might have been. Almost sounded like he said, my place. I guessed that he somehow made it back to his house, took refuge in his basement where we hoarded the supplies we had gathered. Mick and I ran as fast as we could to Kenneth's house, while trying not to make too much noise. We finally arrived and entered carefully.
Kenneth, you here, man? It's Steven,
I said as I entered, but no answer. I quickly made for the door that led to his basement. It was homemade, so the door to it was easy to miss if you didn't know where to look. I quickly lifted the handle on the door, and it wouldn't budge. A moment later, we heard a metal rod slide back behind the door, unlocking it. And Kenneth pokes his head out, telling us to come in. I immediately noticed after looking him over that Kenneth had been injured by the beast. He had a large bandage on his left arm, covering where the bottom half of it used to be. It had been ripped off by the monster. He looked at us weakly, told us how he had escaped and how he was getting weaker by the second. He hadn't been able to properly take care of the stump, so an infection had set up in the wound. He was pale and sickly looking. I tried to explain our plan to Kenneth as quickly as possible before getting set up. After dozing in and out as I paraphrased who Mick was and what the beast was, Kenneth finally gave in to his weariness and passed out. Our plan was to lure the beast into a space we could temporarily trap it in, and then throw in the gas. Mick had informed us that the town hall had actually been built as a safe house for the undercover military personnel, just in case people found out about the experiment and tried to riot. The entire place was rigged to lock down with the push of a button. Mick wasn't for sure if it still worked, but it was our only shot. We tried to leave Kenneth behind to keep him hidden from the monster in his weak state, but he refused. He didn't want to be alone when he died. He didn't want to be alone at all. I didn't like it, to be honest, but I agreed with him. As we stepped out of the house, the fog had managed to cover a majority of the town. Luckily, it hadn't spread past Kenneth's house or to the town hall. We rushed there as quickly as we could while keeping Kenneth on his feet. For a half-dead man, he kept up decent enough. I knew that if we didn't end this quickly and get Kenneth real medical treatment, that he was going to die for sure. And I just couldn't accept that. I put his arm around my neck and practically carried him the latter half of the trip there. We arrived at the bottom of the stairs leading up to the town hall. It looked like I'd always remembered. Only now, it was a sugar-coated lie configured into a tall and wide brick building. We made it up the stairs and into the main hall. According to Mick, the entrance would be sort of narrow for the monster to fit in, but it would manage. The main hall, however, was 5 times larger than its height. It was filled with rows of pews and a stage where the mayor would make announcements or hold events and speeches. There was a second floor that had a balcony area above the main hall so that the people on the second floor could walk towards the edge and down onto the first floor. Mick led us up on the stage and to the back of where a picture was hanging. Behind this large painting was a pad of buttons that controlled the lockdown system. Or at least that's what Mick was trying to explain to me. He then told me how exactly the plan was to unfold. Kenneth was to stay hidden out of harm from the monster through the process. We had a spot for him just outside that was hidden enough for him not to be discovered. Mick said that it would be bait for the beast and distract it while I play my part. My role was to take a portion of the smoke bombs up to the second floor balcony, wait for Mick to give the signal. I was then supposed to throw the gas bombs down onto the thing's back. There were apparently openings on its back. That would be a perfect way for the bombs to enter. After I hit my target, supposing I do, then Mick was to set a timer on the lockdown system that would give him and me and escape out before the entire place filled up with gas. The fog had finally reached us, as we were nearing the finishing touches on our preparation and positioning. The events that happened next will forever be seared into the mind as humanity's worst mistake. We propped open the doors of the hall so that the beast could just walk right in. The only light we had came through many windows that would let the pale moonlight trickle in from all angles. That, paired with the slow entrance of the fog coming into the building, little by little, gave the place an eerie, ghost-like appearance. That's when we first heard its low growl. It was a guttural noise that would have made me piss my pants had I needed to go. After its initial growl, we started to hear the voices. Echoing and coming from weird angles, rung the voices of its countless victims. After hearing a few large steps coming towards the main hall, that's when I caught my first real glance at the beast's appearance. Its snout appeared first. It was reptilian, as was most of its body, and was long. If I had to guess, the snout alone was probably 5 feet in length. There were rows of sharp, jagged teeth sticking out of the jaws that ran all the way to the back of its mouth. Its eyes popped out over its head like an alligator, but were clouded over, like the fog, and like it was blind. Past its large head was an even larger abdomen that started very large in circumference and sloped downward towards the backside. Its leg, feet, and tail were also in the likeness of a crocodile, but had more large and defined muscles, like that of a horse or wild cat. It had matted fur like a dog, with these scabies scattered all along its body. At the end of its tail was a bulbous thing that looked like a flower, not in bloom. Mick told me that's where and how it produces the fog. The most unnerving thing about its appearance, however, was not the reptilian scales, the matted fur, or even the large, jagged teeth. It was the creature's back. All across the creature's back, from its head all the way to the base of the tail, were small mouths of varying sizes. Each mouth had its own set of teeth and loose lips. Some were crying out with random noises. The ones that weren't crying out were moving their lips frantically, as if they were drowning and trying to gasp for air. Any shred of courage I had mustered from Wakefield to here had now been torn from me, and I was frozen with dread. After it came out of the fog, it stared at Mick, who was now yelling at it. He looked afraid too, but kept his composure in front of the beast's presence.
Hey, you ugly bastard! You remember me? Yeah, I'm the one who tried to kill you. Come get me.
Mick said as he gave a quick nod to me during his interaction with the beast. I knew what I had to do, and reluctantly I did it. I threw the bombs down onto its back and tried to sink at least one of them into the mouth. With as many mouths that were on his back, I was bound to make it into one of them. But I didn't. When I had pulled the pins and threw them over the balcony, must have heard me and moved quickly out of the way once I'd thrown them. Mick had already pressed the timer for the lockdown, and the time was ticking. Gas was going to fill up the place, and it was going to shut us in with this thing. During the commotion, the beast had been distracted by me enough for Mick to escape. I was also able to sneakily come back to the first floor and run out the front doors while the beast was trying to climb to the balcony to look for me. The only problem was that we didn't know if just the gas in the building would be enough to kill it. We had no clue if the building was going to contain it if the plan didn't work. We were so close to the place locking down before the system malfunctioned. As the large metal panes began to close on the windows, they got about an inch before they jammed and screeched.
No, what the hell is wrong with this damn thing?
Mick said as he ran to the front door, revealing another pad from outside behind a fake plaque. He was frantically pushing the buttons and the beast noticed us. It was enraged now. It wasted no time in climbing back down and heading straight for us. Before the beast had made it to us, however, there was another voice coming from inside, yelling at the beast. It was the frail, shaky voice that had a hopeless ring to it. It belonged to Kenneth, The beast turned around and I saw Kenneth near the stage with what was left of his arms held out at the beast, giving it a come-get-me look. His jacket looked oddly lumpy as he put a bunch of things into it. I knew what those lumps were and what he was doing. It was the rest of the gas bombs. We had left our packs out with him just in case the plan went to shit. He must have heard the commotion and slipped in. Everything happened in slow motion. Everything from me yelling,
No! Kenneth! Run! Run now!
to the beast running up to him and snatching him up in its terribly jagged maw, and to the beast screeching out in pain and writhing on the floor once the bombs had been released in its insides. Mick finally snapped me out of my shock after the beast stopped moving and lay dead on the floor of the hall. The fog was slowly lifting, and he helped me to my feet.
Come on, Steven. We gotta move now. He's gone. There's nothing we can do now.
He said in a sad but calming voice. After a few moments, I gathered the strength to move on again. Through some investigating, Mick found a car that had been disguised to be a simple automobile but was actually a military-grade car. It was filled with gas. There was a pair of backup keys in a hidden place along the dashboard. Mick had seen them before and knew exactly where to look. We took off as fast as we could and got out of Silver Crossing. Our next objective was to warn the other towns about what had happened. Halfway into our trip, Mick noticed something strange in the woods by the road. Doesn't exactly tell me what he sees, but he swerves the car toward it. I finally saw what he was looking at when I turned. There were some trees in the distance that bore some kind of strange substance on them, like fleshy webs splattered among the vegetation. When we got closer, it looked as if some giant monster had thrown up all over the surrounding area. We reached the edge of the veiny, pulsing viscera, and doom fell upon our eyes.
Dear God, what have we done?
Mick said as his eyes scanned over the horror. I was speechless, to say the least. My heart sank into my stomach. I choked on my own saliva. It was a nest. Hundreds of large eggs lay scattered upon the moist, beating land. Countless eggs, all laid in random positions and clusters upon the ground and trees. What was worse was not only the fact that the beast had produced offspring, but that they were all hatched.
We gotta warn the people of Wakefield,
I said, snapping back to reality. Mick sat motionless for a minute, so I gave him a slap to the face. Mick! Damn it, man! We have to go! He wiped the sweat from his brow that was now dripping behind his shaking glasses, turned the vehicle around, speeding off towards the next town. We arrived in Wakefield shortly after, and what we saw filled our hearts with an even bigger sense of our impending apocalypse. The entire town looked just like Silver Crossing. Quiet and stagnant. The place reeked to death. Not a living soul in sight. Just pools of blood and guts lined the street. Entire limbs and torsos scattered amongst the once alive town's sidewalks. As we carefully and slowly drove further into the town to look for survivors, the fog started to roll in behind us on the edge of town. Mick stopped the car and listened as we heard a single voice call out from somewhere far off. He thought maybe it was a lucky survivor calling to us, but I knew better. All of a sudden, the single voice was followed by more and more screams and calls of distress. They were multiplying like wildfire, coming from all directions just as the fog wrapped around the perimeter of the town. They were singing, but not beautiful melodies that bring a tear to your eye, not sounds of joy. They were singing in wailful woes of pain and agony. It was like a choir of sorrow. All the poor innocent souls now feeding the songs of doom we heard. All the lies of the hopeless were now bearing down upon us as we heard a chorus of the damned.